You're standing at the edge of a tall building, looking down. Your palms should be sweating. Your heart should be pounding. Your legs should be begging you to step back. But none of that happens. You feel nothing. No fear at all. Not here, not ever, for the rest of your life. What would that actually mean? At first, it sounds like a superpower. No more anxiety before a big presentation. No more racing heart during a scary movie. No more freezing up in front of a crowd. A life completely free of fear sounds like a life free of one of humanity's most uncomfortable emotions. But fear is not simply an uncomfortable feeling your brain forces on you for no reason. It's a warning system. And warning systems exist because something out there is actually worth warning you about. This condition exists in extremely rare form, and researchers have studied real patients with damage to a small almond-shaped structure deep in the brain called the amygdala. One well-documented case involves a woman researchers refer to as patient SM, who has a rare genetic condition that destroyed both sides of her amygdala. Neuroscientists who studied her found something remarkable. She could not consciously experience fear, even when exposed to snakes, spiders, horror movies, or genuinely threatening situations. On the surface, that might sound liberating. In practice, her case reveals exactly why fear exists in the first place. Now imagine that condition applied to you, starting today. The first thing you'd notice isn't how calm you feel. It's how much more dangerous your ordinary decisions suddenly become. You'd walk closer to the edge of that building, not because you're braver, but because your brain no longer flags the edge as something requiring extra caution. Fear, it turns out, isn't just an emotion you experience. It's a signal that adjusts your behavior in real time, keeping you a few careful inches away from danger without you ever having to consciously think about it. Here's where the science gets genuinely interesting. Researchers who have studied patient SM found that she had been in numerous dangerous situations throughout her life, including being held at knife point and gunpoint on separate occasions, and reported feeling little to no fear during these events. She wasn't reckless by choice. Her brain simply never sent the signal that would have prompted normal self-protective caution. Without fear telling her to avoid dangerous people, dangerous places, and dangerous decisions, she found herself in genuinely dangerous situations more often than most people ever would. Now scale this up to everyday life, the ordinary moments where fear quietly protects you without you noticing. Fear is what makes you check both directions before crossing a busy street, even when you're in a hurry. It's what makes you hesitate before touching something that might be hot, or walking down a dark alley alone at night. Psychologists who study risk behavior describe fear as a kind of built-in cost calculator, constantly running in the background, weighing potential danger against potential reward. Remove that calculator, and every decision defaults to whatever seems immediately interesting or convenient, with no automatic brake pulling you back from the truly dangerous options. Think about what this means for how you'd actually behave day to day. Not just in extreme situations like standing on rooftops, but in the mundane accumulation of small choices. Whether to speed through a yellow light, whether to confront someone much larger than you in an argument, whether to invest your entire savings in something enticing but unverified. Fear doesn't just stop you from doing catastrophically dangerous things. It nudges you away from hundreds of smaller risky choices every single day. Choices you don't even register as fear-based because the hesitation happens so quickly and automatically. This is where the twist comes in. You might expect a fearless life to be a more confident, more successful life. But confidence and fearlessness are not the same thing. Confidence is built from taking calculated risks and learning from both the successes and the near misses. Fear is actually part of that learning process because the discomfort of a close call is what teaches your brain to avoid similar situations in the future. Without fear, you don't just lose caution. You lose the emotional weight that makes lessons stick. Researchers who study fear conditioning have found that this emotional response is central to how humans and animals learn to associate certain situations with danger in the first place. Remove the fear response entirely, and that learning mechanism loses much of its power. Now widen the lens to something bigger. What if this condition applied not just to you, but to everyone on Earth, all at once? Public safety would face an entirely new kind of crisis. Right now, fear is one of the most effective, least expensive safety mechanisms society has. It's why warning labels work, why safety announcements before flights actually change behavior, why most people don't casually walk into traffic. Public health researchers who study risk communication have found that fear-based messaging, when used appropriately, is one of the most effective tools for encouraging safety behaviors like wearing seatbelts or avoiding hazardous situations. Remove humanity's capacity for fear entirely, and every safety campaign built on that foundation stops working overnight. Not because people become braver, but because the emotional mechanism that made those messages effective simply no longer exists. Crime and personal safety would shift in strange, uneven ways. Fear is part of what maintains social order, sometimes usefully, by making most people hesitate before breaking laws or harming others out of a fear of consequences. Criminologists who study deterrence theory note that the perceived threat of punishment relies partly on people's fear of that punishment actually being enough to change behavior. Remove the emotional weight of fear from that equation entirely, and deterrence, built on emotional consequence alone, would lose much of its power, even if logical consequences like prison remained exactly the same on paper. Here's the twist most people don't expect. A fearless world would not necessarily be a braver world in any meaningful sense. Bravery, as psychologists describe it, is the act of doing something difficult or dangerous despite feeling afraid. If fear never existed, the entire concept of bravery would lose its meaning. Walking into a burning building to save someone isn't brave if you never felt the fear of fire in the first place. It's just an action, stripped of the emotional weight that made it meaningful. Removing fear wouldn't create a world of heroes. It would quietly erase the very thing that made heroism recognizable as heroism at all. Now, bring this back to something deeply personal. What happens to your relationships if you can never feel fear again? Fear of losing someone you love is often exactly what makes you show up for them. Apologize first, or work through a hard conversation instead of walking away. Attachment researchers who study close relationships have found that fear of loss is often deeply intertwined with the behaviors that maintain long-term bonds, prompting people to repair conflict rather than simply let a relationship quietly dissolve. Remove that fear entirely, and you might find yourself far more willing to simply walk away from difficult moments, not because you stopped caring, but because the emotional alarm that normally motivates repair never goes off in the first place. Let's slow down and look closer at the mechanics of this, because fear doesn't operate as a single switch. It operates on a spectrum, from mild unease to full-blown panic. And each level of that spectrum does something slightly different for you. Consider the mildest form, simple nervousness. Right before a job interview or a first date, your body releases a small amount of the same stress hormones involved in full fear responses. That mild nervousness sharpens your focus, quickens your reflexes, and keeps you alert to details you might otherwise miss. Psychologists who study performance under pressure describe this as an optimal arousal zone, a level of nervous energy that actually improves performance rather than hindering it. Without any capacity for fear at all, you would lose this sharpening effect entirely. You might walk into that interview completely calm, but also completely flat, missing the extra edge of alertness that a little healthy nervousness usually provides. Now consider the opposite end of the spectrum, genuine terror. This is the reaction fear is most associated with, and it exists for very good evolutionary reasons. When your ancestors encountered a genuine predator, an overwhelming fear response triggered a flood of adrenaline, redirecting blood flow to your muscles, sharpening your senses, and preparing your body to run or fight within a fraction of a second. Neuroscientists who study the fight or flight response have found that this rapid physiological reaction can mean the difference between escaping danger and not escaping it at all. Without the capacity for that overwhelming fear response, your body would lose access to that same emergency surge of physical readiness precisely when you might need it most. Now think about something surprisingly practical: financial decision-making. Fear of loss is one of the most well-documented forces in economic behavior. Behavioral economists have found that people generally feel the pain of losing money more intensely than the pleasure of gaining an equivalent amount, a phenomenon known as loss aversion. This fear-based aversion to loss is part of what keeps most people from making wildly risky financial decisions, like gambling their entire savings on a single, unproven investment. Remove the capacity for that fear entirely, and the natural brake most people have against reckless financial risk-taking would simply disappear, potentially leading to far more frequent and far more severe financial ruin. Now widen the lens one more time, back to childhood development, because this is where the stakes become genuinely significant for an entire lifetime. Children learn an enormous amount of what's dangerous through fear-based experiences. Touching something hot once and feeling the sting of pain and fear together teaches a lasting lesson far more effectively than simply being told a stove is dangerous. Developmental psychologists who study childhood learning have found that fear conditioning during early childhood plays a critical role in helping children build an accurate mental map of what is and isn't safe in their environment. A child who could never feel fear would need to rely entirely on logical explanation and memorized rules to avoid danger, without the powerful emotional reinforcement that normally makes those lessons stick on an instinctive level. The result could be a child who technically knows a hot stove is dangerous, but who doesn't feel the same instinctive hesitation before reaching for it anyway. So what if you could never feel fear? You would not simply become a braver, more confident version of yourself. You would lose one of your brain's most sophisticated, fastest-acting safety systems, the one that keeps you a careful step back from danger, teaches you from near misses, and quietly motivates you to repair what matters before it's too late. The world would not become a safer, calmer place. It would simply become a world where the warning lights had been switched off, while every actual danger they were built to warn you about stayed exactly the same. Maybe fear was never really the enemy it seems like in the moment. Maybe it was always the quiet, uncomfortable proof that something in your life is actually worth protecting.